something I hear quite a bit in the health and nutrition space is how important it is to learn how to read food labels. And there's a couple problems I have with that. The first one being that if it's a real food, if it's a real natural whole food, it doesn't need a label. The only time you need food labels is if something has been done to the food. If there's something added to it, or there's more than one ingredient, then you need a food label. So you have to look at food labels as a warning label, because the food label only tells you what is in the food, what they've added, but it does not tell you what they have done to the food. And that is where the big problem comes in. And that is what the food manufacturers do not want you to know, because if you knew what they did to the food, there is no way 90% of the people would still choose to consume that food. I mean, let's just use something like the pink slime. I'm sure everybody knows what pink slime is. And if you don't, that is essentially what they make like chicken nuggets out of. So if you go to McDonald's or you go to the freezer section at the grocery store and you get chicken nuggets, that pink slime is what those chicken nuggets are made out of. And I'm not talking about like chicken tenders where it's an actual piece of like chicken breast. I'm talking about the chicken product, if that's what you want to call it, chicken nuggets, where when you cook these things and you break them open, it looks almost like chicken that has been produced in the form of like maybe a glued together sawdust or something. That is pink slime. And what pink slime is literally all the chicken byproduct and the waste products that gets thrown into a giant vat and gets ground up and extremely processed and squeezed out in a tube into the form of a chicken nugget. And when a lot of people found that out a long time ago, they stopped consuming chicken nuggets because it was absolutely disgusting. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Pretty much any prepackaged food, and especially hyper-processed foods, go through a ridiculous amount of processing, and the stuff that goes into these foods shouldn't even be considered food. And I think it's a crime to actually consider a lot of this stuff actual food, because it's not food. It's food products. It's chemicals and unnatural ingredients disguised and marketed as food. But never before at any other point in our history has any of this stuff been considered food. And just because they lump all these ingredients together and they package it up and make it look pretty and they convince you to buy it does not mean it's actual food. In most cases, the food manufacturers are required by law to put the ingredients on the label, but they are not required to put what happens to the food on the label, what goes into actually making the product. And most of these food manufacturers actually consider that proprietary information, and they will not let those secrets out. Because if those secrets came out, people would not consume those foods and those companies would go bankrupt, which is exactly what needs to happen. But people need to understand that just because it's not on the label and that information isn't readily available to them, does not mean that the food is any less bad. This stuff is still extremely horrible to consume, and the process that these foods go through to become a food product renders the food a toxic substance that we are putting in our bodies. And when it goes in our bodies, that's exactly the way our body sees it. Our body sees it as a toxic substance, and that ushers in inflammation and leaky gut and gut disorders, gut dysbiosis, autoimmune conditions, cancer. It all stems from these hyper-processed, hyper-palatable foods that are manufactured in a lab by teams of scientists that are genuinely creating these foods to make you addicted to them, and for these foods to override and hijack your normal intuition that you would normally have so that you know what is actually food. It hijacks that. It rewires your brain into thinking these food products that come in a box and come in a package are actual food. When the simplest thing that we can do to get away from that stuff and reclaim our health is to just eat real whole foods. Just focus on what is natural. Focus on the foods that got us here. Personally, I've been following a carnivore lifestyle for over 5.5 years now, but I'm not one of those people that thinks that everybody needs to be carnivore to improve their health. I think carnivore is the most effective tool that will get you started down that path, and it can be a great way to reset yourself. But to optimize your health over the long term, I don't think you need to follow a carnivore diet indefinitely. For some people, they're going to land on carnivore and it's going to make them feel so great that they're going to stick with it forever. And for other people, they're going to want to go back to eating other things. But I think what is true for everybody across the board is that we could all benefit from eating foods that do not need a label. Now, the best way to do that, and my personal favorite way to do that, is to source my food locally from local producers. That allows you to see exactly where your food comes from. It allows you to see how your food is processed, and it ensures that your food is coming from people you can trust. Not from big industries that only care about profit and only care about greed, and they're only out to make a buck. Because at the end of the day, These food labels exist because these companies have prioritized money and profit over the health of the consumer. They include all these artificial ingredients, and the food goes through insane processing because it makes the food extremely cheap, and it also makes the food extremely addictive so that you come back and you buy it over and over and over. Food should not be addictive because it fires off the reward centers in your brain and creates a dopamine response. It should be addictive because it optimizes your health and makes you feel abso-freaking-lutely fantastic. That is what true food addiction is, and that's the addiction that we should all strive to have. So instead of focusing your time on trying to learn how to read food labels, focus that time and energy on experimenting on yourself by eating real whole foods to see how those foods affect you, and structure a diet that is unique to you. Create a list with 2 columns. In the first column, all the foods that make you feel fantastic. The second column, all the foods that make you feel like crap. Experiment on yourself with all these different foods and be very, very honest about how those foods affect you. For anything that makes you feel like crap, put it in the column of foods that make you feel like crap and do not consume those foods. For the foods that make you feel fantastic and they optimize your health, put it in the column of foods that make you feel great, and those are the foods you can focus on. And from there, even if you choose to eat the other foods, the foods that make you feel like crap, at least you've done your homework and you know what to expect. So if you eat that food and you end up feeling like garbage, you've got nobody to blame but yourself. But with that said, don't waste your time trying to read food labels. The simplest solution is to just buy foods that don't require a label.